Zach Leary, welcome to Eric's Psychedelic Breakfast.
Eric, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
The legend, man. Thank you so much for being here. I mean, your dad is literally a legend. A a true the mind of a legend, if you know the song.
Yes, he is. He was.
Yeah, he is and he was. And you are too, man, honestly.
Thank you.
The son of the mind of the but yeah, one question that obviously a lot of people ask you is what's it like growing up with Timothy Leary being your dad and obviously Ram Dass right next to you. And I actually wanted to ask you, did you ever meet Maharaji?
No, 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 no. That was, he
Okay.
died before I was born. So, yeah,
Oh, okay. Wow,
yeah, he died,
got
he
you.
died, yeah, he died in 1973, September of 1973, almost exactly a month before I was born. So, yeah, not possible,
Wow.
but I could say yes, I've met him. I've met him in the astral and in the heart. So,
Wow. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, me too. When I was reading Miracle of Love, I had a very good connection with Maharaji there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's the whole idea, right? For um, the second generation of devotees like myself and like you too, I guess it's like the whole idea is that even though he's not in his body, we can still be with him, still be in the present, still be in the force field, and still be in the love.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
and being in the body doesn't really matter as much. The teachings and the vibration live on. And
Right.
also, I think too, in some cases, I mean, of course, I go back and forth, like wishing, wow, I really wish I was at Maharaji's feet at his Tucket in India and got to be with him in the body. And of course, that's great.
Right.
And we all think that. But on the
Hmm.
other hand, too, I'm also like, part of me is like glad because it's sort of like, when somebody is in their human form and their incarnation, you still have to deal with their humanity. And maybe he would have let me down, you know.
Right.
Maybe I wouldn't have liked him as much, and maybe I
Exactly.
would have seen something about him I didn't like. And you got to deal with their humanity, and
Yeah.
he was a human being after all, he wasn't above being a human. And so in this way, we're divorced from all that. So I go both ways with it.
Yeah, and sometimes I wonder if um Ram Dass talks a lot about Guru's grace and it
Yeah.
it makes me wonder, is that like specific to a person that's a guru, or is Guru's grace could possibly be a moment? Could it be everyone potentially? Can everyone be the guru? You know what I
Um,
mean?
I mean, yeah, I mean, sure, in some ways. I mean, Maharaji would say, and Ramana Maharshi would say before him, God, Guru, Self, all the same. You know,
Mm,
I think actually Ramana Maharshi said that first, and Maharaji echoed it. But God, Guru, Self, all the same. And if you look at it that way, we're all each other's teachers. You know, we can all be each other's teachers, and we could all help each other, walk each other home, and help us through
right.
the fog of life. Um, but the guru's grace, I mean, that's also sort of like a practice too, is falling back on the grace and the wave and the love of the unconditional love and teachings of the guru, and that grace is always available to you, even when you get in your own way.
Wow. Yeah. And that is coming from someone who has literally probably had the most amazing trip with Ram Dass um doing psilocybin. What a lucky moment. And I mean,
Yeah, it was a very lucky moment indeed. Yeah, I'm self-aware enough to realize how fortunate I was to have that experience. And at the time, I recognized it too, but it wasn't as big of
mhm.
a deal. As I look back on it now, I'd say, yeah, just a little over 10 years ago now. 2004. Yeah, it's a little over 10 years ago now, and looking back on it, it was so so amazing.
You know, something that's really crazy is that I found out that the first time and place that Ram Dass ever did any psychedelic was
Mm,
with Timothy Leary
yeah,
in Mexico,
yeah,
in this city called Cuernavaca.
yeah.
And that's actually where I was raised.
Oh wow.
And it was mind blowing when I found that out. Like it's crazy because, you know, I came from there and I never expected to see any type of connection with that place. I always thought it was, oh, it's such a small city. It says no one will even know about it. I always have to explain what it is. And then out of nowhere, I'm like, someone's explaining to me what where Ram
Oh
Dass
no,
did mushrooms for the first time.
and not just Ramdas. I mean, Cuernavaca is a very important hub of indigenous mushroom use.
Oh,
Going
wow.
back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Many great
Wow.
curanderos came from Cuernavaca, and many mushroom strains kind of originated there as well, and a very
Oh,
important
wow.
vortex for the sacred mushroom. Yeah, man.
Wow.
So it's in your blood.
Wow. Yeah. Wow, that is such a crazy synchronicity, man. Um, I've always felt so connected with Ram Dass's and Tim Leary because they just seem like such normal human beings. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And for one thing that made me feel like very connected to them was they would talk a lot about doing the dishes and how when they used to do a lot of acid, the sink would get very dirty. No one would want to do the dishes because and
Yeah,
I every time I walk past my kitchen and like especially when I have like a big podcast or something, I'm like, I want to have the world's biggest podcast, but I don't want to do the dishes, and I make myself do the dishes, you know?
that's a that's a great thing to realize. It's sort of like in self-help circles, you hear that thing about making the bed. The first you should always make,
Oh, right. Yeah.
like all high performance
Yeah.
leaders and CEOs, make your bed in the morning because it starts with a clean mind, and a clean perspective on the day. Um, but I mean, I mean, what you're saying is also indicative of the opposite regarding Tim and Ramdas, is that they were not normal people. It's
That's
like
true.
mundane things like that. They were just like could care less. Like Timothy was, my dad was extremely messy. Could care less about practical things. Um, about household issues. He could care less about how the house looked. That was always my mom. He was terrible with money. Um,
That's great to hear, though.
you know, and because his mind was just always somewhere else.
Right. Yeah.
It was just always kind of at this other place where his mind was just resonating at such a high level. Um,
Yep.
and like I didn't realize that at the time. I didn't get that till much later, but I mean, yeah, I mean, he really was the smartest guy in the room. We use that expression as a cliche, but he literally was the smartest guy in the room.
And
His, yeah.
do you think that he was always the smartest guy in the room? Do you think he had so many experiences that he grew like with you alongside and like you guys once you started realizing that he was so smart, maybe he was like getting there, you know? Or do you think he was just smart his whole life?
Um, well, yeah, I mean, he was pretty brilliant his whole life,
Hmm.
even before psychedelics. If you look at like
Right.
his doctorate thesis, which is the interpersonal diagnosis of personality, which was written in 1957, I think. I have to fact check me on that, but that was pre-psychedelics. And if you look at that, I mean, it's an extraordinary work. So I mean, he was always tapped into um, very high cognitive functioning capabilities.
Right.
Um, I think it also grew over time as well. But
Yeah, in the movie, oh my goodness, I can't believe I forgot the name. Dying to Know. Um, Fantastic movie, by the way. The first time it's in my library.
yeah, it's
And
great.
I yeah, I was mind blown. I was like, oh, I'm just gonna it's probably not. a real movie, probably not a real great movie. And I watched it one day and I was like, wow, I just like accidentally learned everything about the psychedelic history
It's a
and
good movie. It's well made. Yeah,
and now it's been turned into a book, I
yeah,
heard,
yeah.
which very exciting.
Yeah, very exciting. I mean, the two of them had an incredible friendship and partnership that, veered off in incredible ways, and I think that's the most important part. Sure, their early work
Mm,
together is great and was historic and very important, but yeah, what happened once they veered off, I think, is even more interesting. Yeah,
yeah,
when Richard Albert became Ramdas and Tim became more of an outlaw, I think those divergent paths are just so fast.
right. Yeah, I remember there was a scene in Dying to Know, I think it was Dying to Know, where he's in the courthouse and they ask him to describe like that he's done so many trials and ingestions with so many people and they ask him, can you describe the effects of the psychedelics? And he's like, I can't. Like he never put himself as as like the person who, he always, I don't know, he had that authenticity. He was very humble with it,
Yeah.
He stood
Well,
outside of it. I don't know.
yeah. And I think, yeah, he was, but he also had an incredible passion that bordered on, I don't know, that bordered maybe on zealotry or something, but yeah, who knows? I don't know. He's not around anymore to ask. So,
Right. And around that time that he split away from Ramdas, is that ironically a similar time when you started getting into Hinduism and Ramdas, or have you just always been into
well, my journey
Hinduism?
was much later, much, much later, keep in mind
Right.
that all
Oh,
that
okay.
happened way before I was born. But yeah, by the time
Got you.
I kind of got into, I mean, for me, Ram Dass was always around when I was growing up,
Wow.
always. But, and I did read Be Here Now when I was a teenager and following the Grateful Dead around. And I really did love it and I resonated with it. But I never viewed Ram Dass as like my teacher. I was actually, to be honest, when I was growing up, when I was a teenager, I was terrified of Ram Dass. Uh,
Really?
yeah, because when you're around somebody like that who beams that way, beams just with that stare and that smile and that piercing glare of unconditional love and joy, it's hard to be around when you're not in that space. If
And
you don't understand what that space is, you think, wow, like what's up with this guy? Like this, it's really challenging to be around. Um, and it wasn't until much later did I uh, change my relationship and my perspective. Yeah, but keep in mind what you were talking about that happened in the late '60s, early '70s, and you know way before I was born.
wow.
Yeah,
Well, I wish I could have been alive then, man. That sounds like such a good year that brought. I mean, it's a great time to be alive now because we have all of the results of everything that happened then.
yeah.
But for example, the Grateful Dead, man, that's something that I can only experience at them being old, which sure has its own pros. If I could go back to young Zach Leary and be like, "Hey, do you want to see the Grateful Dead and when they're old and still performing and like their last shows?" You'd probably be
Yeah.
like, "Yo, that'd be crazy." But now I'm sitting here like asking you, does sitting at home and watching live performances of the Grateful Dead in the 70s and stuff, does that make
Mhm.
it give it justice to what it was like?
Well, oh man, I'm kind of the wrong person to ask because I started seeing them when they were still around in 1987, 1988 is when I started going heavily.
Mm,
And I spent so much time seeing them and with Garcia too, and it's been such a huge part of my life for 35 years now. It's like kind of the core kind of a center tentpole flagpole of my life that when I go listen to an old show watch an old show or go to archive.org, and because every show they ever played is on archive.org, and I bring those
Wow.
up, I can still tap in, you know, yeah,
Wow.
I can still get it. And on the other hand, too, like when you go see Dead and Company today, which is not the Grateful Dead, it's not even close, but
Right.
it's still really good.
John
It's still
Mayer.
John Mayer, and it's good. It has the spirit, and it's a lot of fun. Um, there are tons of young people there. There are tons of people your age who weren't even alive when Garcia was still around. And so, yeah, I guess people are still discovering the music and the magic, and they did something right. You
Yeah.
know,
Right.
people are still discovering it. I'm amazed at how many young people are at Dead Company shows today. Blows my
Hmm.
mind, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, John Mayer is also a great guitarist, you know. That's
It's
I feel like that
fantastic.
helped a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, yeah. And another band that recently has also been touring is, well, not band, but Pink Floyd and Roger Waters. Did you ever get a chance to see Pink Floyd live in their prime?
I did, but not with Roger because Roger left in 1980, you
Oh,
know.
wow.
But I
Okay.
saw the post-Roger incarnations, in the
Wow.
80s, in 80s and 90s,
Yeah.
which were great. They were
Right.
great. I mean,
Yeah.
still a fantastic show.
Oh
Mm.
man, I hate to make this question, but in their primes, which show would you have rather been at? A Pink Floyd Pride show or a Grateful Dead?
Well, I feel I got to see the Grateful Dead in the prime.
Right.
I feel
Okay.
like for me, there are a few different periods of the Grateful Dead's journey that
Okay.
were peaks: 69 and 70, 73, 74, 77, and then 88 and 89 and 90. In 89 and 90, they were just as good as they ever were, period, hands down. And I saw them tons then. So I feel I got to see the Grateful Dead. I mean, sure, I would have liked to see them, at the Fillmore East with 1,000 people, of course, who wouldn't? But I
Right.
saw them at the time, and so probably not the best comparison. I would maybe shift the question to like Pink Floyd or Led Zeppelin, or Jimi Hendrix or the Who or the Eagles or
And who would you compare Grateful Dead to, rightfully?
no one.
Wow.
They're in their own category.
Okay.
But I wish
Got
I
her answer.
saw I wish I saw Pink Floyd in 1977 though, on the Animals tour. If there's any one tour to go back to,
Ooh.
it would be the
Yeah.
77 Animals tour. Yeah,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I talk about seeing um Sean Lennon with Roger Waters' son and Les Claypool.
Oh,
They all performed
the Animals.
Animals.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that live. I was there.
You like it?
It was great. Les Claypool
Yeah.
singing sounds a lot like Roger Waters,
Mm,
honestly.
yeah. Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that show, but I'm sure it was good. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw them, I think in Houston, I think it was, or
Oh,
something.
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're great.
So now you've been doing a lot of kirtons, which is
Mm.
so cool. I love kirtons. Um, is the only difference between a kirtan and a chant that it has music behind it?
Um, well, kind of. I mean, kirtan is also chanting in a way, and
Right.
I would say like the difference between kirtan and like mantra. Um,
Okay.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean, sort of.
Yeah, right.
I mean, the musical part of kirtan, the fact that it is kind of essentially a mantra practice on top of music, it is important. It does make a difference because music, the sonic tapestry can create a different level of elevated ecstasy and bliss, especially when things really ramp up and get to a fever pitch.
Hmm.
And I think that is an important part of kirtan, definitely.
Wow.
I mean, it is essentially just about the mantra, of course, but on the other hand, look, our ears and our hearts like what we hear. And so when somebody's good at it and also a good musician, it can take it to the next level for sure.
Right.
you know.
It makes me think about the difference between a good kirtan, a psychedelic experience, and a Pink Floyd concert or a Grateful Dead concert.
All very similar, man. All very
Right?
similar.
Like
Very similar.
what happens if you combine all of
Right.
them?
Yeah.
Has that
I
ever
mean,
happened?
I mean, the feelings that I've
That's
gotten
crazy.
at kirtans, at really good kirtans, are very similar to the feelings I've gotten at Grateful Dead shows, to where
Wow.
not exactly the same, don't get me wrong, but very similar, you know, because you get to that point where you are so in the moment that you're not thinking about anything else, you know. And I don't know about you, but that's a pretty tough thing to experience in life. Our minds are always rambling so
Right.
strong, you know, and the monkey mind is always firing. So even when you're doing something great, you could still be distracted, sidetracked, or whatever. But like when you're in those moments where magic is happening and your mind is nowhere else, it's just right there, you know, and that's a great thing to experience.
Right. It almost feels like faith.
It's like faith. It's also very psychedelic too.
Right. Because like it when you're in any moment, you just feel like you have to be worrying about money. Or if you're not worrying about money, then you have to be worrying about something because money equals time. And if you're not doing something valuable with your time, you're bored, you're wasting time.
Mm.
Um, but the truth is that you can actually, instead of identify with that, you can identify with the moment, which is so beautiful because the moment does not care about money, it does not care about time, it doesn't care about anything. It just, oh, it's always there. And that is such a cool thing to identify with. Such a powerful thing to not like, oh, okay, this happened, but I'm still here in the moment. That,
Yes,
okay,
exactly, man. Exactly. That's the duality of being human, you know. It's like we worry about the small things, you
right.
know. We're we're
Yeah.
pro- we're wired to worry about the small things.
Yeah. And even in the Bible, it says, uh, somewhere, I don't know. I haven't really, okay, I'm just gonna say, it says something like, don't place, like your worries place your worries on me, not on the material or whatever. And
Hmm.
everything else will follow or everything else will come.
Hmm.
And it's so like Maharaji was a perfect example of that. Like he would
Yeah.
literally pray for suffering, you know, to
Yeah,
try to stay in this plane.
to absorb it for others, you know. Um,
Right.
yeah, and the Bhagavad Gita says the same thing too. You know, Krishna says the same thing. Place your worries on me, you know, and
Yeah.
you fixate
Right.
on me in all of your actions, then you won't be in as much suffering. And all of your actions too, you know, like even the mundane. When you're doing the dishes, like you said at the beginning, like
Oh, right.
if you're doing the dishes and thinking about Krishna, then that becomes an act of devotion, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, is that kind of a little bit of the point of saying Hare Krishna? Because I know, like, after I was very young, I started listening to Duncan's podcast, for example, before I heard anything about Hare Krishna or anything. I mean,
Hmm.
I've obviously knew about Buddha, but I hadn't read much about him. But just after listening to a bunch of his podcasts, him saying Hare Krishna at the end
Hmm.
just made me want to say it. I just went around saying it. And and people would ask me like, what does it mean? And from what I understood, it was there was energies behind the saying it of God's name that would bring
Yeah.
you good
And
luck.
also too, but you know, don't forget the rest of the mantra too, you know. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. You know, yeah, it's the repetition of God's name. And like we were talking about kirtan, you know, when you repeat the mantras, you are activating in something inside of you that fixates you on God, on spirit, on
Mm.
source, you know, and takes you out of your feeble little monkey mind,
Wow.
you know.
Wow. That makes me think, I want to talk a little bit about this book, The Psychedelic Experience that
Sure.
Timothy Leary wrote. I mean, my first question, I guess, would be whose idea was it originally to realize that the stages of death align perfectly with the psychedelic stages?
Um, yeah, I think there is no direct, neither of them will take credit for it. I think it was a joint
Wow.
discovery. When they discovered the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that they realized that, like, the death, the ascension of death, and the different layers of ego death were perfect juxtapositions against the psychedelic experience. Yeah, I don't really know if it was a Tim thing or a Ram Dass thing. I always have thought it
Hmm.
was just a joint discovery. Um,
And then there's Ralph Metzner.
and Ralph Metzner too, of course. But
Yeah, of course.
yeah, no, I mean, yeah. But it was an amazing, especially for the times. Like back in those days, you got to remember that, like, there was not a yoga studio in every corner. Nobody really in America knew what mindfulness meditation was. I mean, this is early on, man. This is before all of that stuff came to America. Nobody knew what Hare Krishna was. Nobody knew what yoga was. Nobody knew what mindfulness was. Very few people knew much about the Buddha or Krishna or any Eastern esoteric or mystic traditions. No, but that was considered, it was like speaking Martian. And so it's really prophetic that they discovered that when they did. Um, yeah, very, very prophetic because
Yeah.
they stumbled on something that still, I mean, that book is still incredibly appropriate for today.
Yeah. Yeah, man. I'm surprised I didn't talk about it a little bit more, dying to know. But I that feeling we're talking about being in the moment when
Mm,
you're saying kirtons and at a really good Pink Floyd concert, in the psychedelic experience, they talk about the first bardo, and then they talk about the second bardo, and they talk about everything always going back into that first bardo. And if you lose that clear light moment, is then it's kind of like a ride through, and that's what the book kind of prepares you for. Would you say that first bardo is a way to stay with that same type of feeling that you get when you're in the moment? Is
uh,
like because they say
yeah, I
it's
mean,
like eternal enlightenment or whatever. And
do you have it handy? Do you have it handy? Like, I don't have the book handy right
oh
now, but
yeah, I have it. I got it right here.
yeah, if you just read like the kind of the little intro to the first Bardo, I think it might help listeners. So I don't want to misquote it.
Okay, okay. Let me see. Mm, like the part that you record. Okay, here we go. Let me see. Uh, okay, so the first borrow is the period of ego loss and non-game ecstasy. So it says that the primary clear light seen at the moment of ego loss. Oh, okay. So all
Hmm.
individuals who have received the practical teachings of this manual, if the text be remembered, will be set face to face with the ecstatic radiance and will win illumination instantaneously without entering upon hallucinatory struggles and without further suffering on the age-long pathway of normal evolution, which traverses the various worlds of game existence.
Game existence. Right.
Right.
It's interesting terminology too. Very much of the times, that
Right.
all of these little melodramas throughout our day are essentially just games. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, but I mean, that's exactly right. And that's a great thing to remember. especially during the psychedelic experience or any contemplative practice, psychedelics, breath work, kirtan, mantra, float tanks, whatever. Always come back to that, always come back to the central thread of, your ego dissolving, and that essentially the difference between our personalities and our souls are two very different things.
Right. Like the difference between the person in the game and the person playing the game, the
Yeah,
avatar. There's so much
exactly.
there's so much terminology. I think it was Duncan, ironically again, who went in the Bible and changed the term. Okay, I think it was someone else who did this actually. He was just reading it. I heard it from Duncan. Who he changed the terminology in the Bible to be computer language. So instead of God, it was like programmer, and instead like instead of it was code, like it was code language, simulation language, and it was the craziest thing. Like, oh my God, the Bible is literally like explaining simulation theory
Hmm.
in this concept.
Wow, I didn't know that. I've been yeah, I didn't. I lost track of when Duncan did that. That's amazing.
I
It's great.
would try to find whoever did that, try to send it to you.
That's really, really cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of like the Jefferson Bible. Thomas Jefferson had his own Bible that kind of it stripped out all the miracle stuff and
Whoa.
and turned it into like a very practical guide for living. And it's really great.
Wow.
But I love that. Yeah.
Wow. That reminds me also of Neville Goddard's interpretation of the Bible. I really like Neville Goddard.
Yeah. No,
You
for
like Neville
sure.
Goddard? What's
Oh
it?
yeah, yeah. Totally, man. It's great stuff. Um, but I've never I love that idea of the Bible as simulation theory. I mean, it's one theory. It's one way to go.
Ah,
It's one way to go. I'm not positive it's the way to go, but you
right.
know, it
Yeah.
certainly becomes more and more compelling, especially as the digital age, you know, has taken a hold of humanity in the way that it has. We're so ensconced in the digital information age now that separating cyber realities from waking realities and physical realities have become indistinguishable.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
and
yeah,
that makes me think, how will that mix with psychedelics? I mean, when I think of a VR experience, I honestly think of, I mean, I know that people are going to be, I mean, people already go watch movies, Grateful Dead concerts and TV, or, if you can have that experience while tripping psychedelics, safe from your bedroom in a virtual experience. I mean, just to talk about the therapeutical aspects of that is kind of very interesting to me.
yeah. I mean, Terrence McKenna stumbled on that
Oh, that's
so
right.
long ago. I mean, in the
Yeah.
early 90s. If you look at the subtitle for the Archaic Revival,
Egg revival.
um,
Right.
the book maybe came out in 92, 93. If you look at the subtitle of it, it's like Reflections on Shamanism's UFOs and Virtual Reality. He was,
Right.
yeah, I mean, he caught that in the early 90s, which is insane if you think about it. Insane. I mean, he saw that way before anybody else did. That when we are creating these, like John Perry Barlow said, cyberspace is a place. It's its own tangible dimension that
Mm,
you can go exist in and create an avatar and hang out in. And if you really add another dimension to it to make it all encompassing and multidimensional, then hey, what's the difference? Like,
wow.
what's the difference really? I mean, is there one? I don't know.
Right.
If you're an avatar living your life in virtual reality, connecting with other people, having relationships, meeting them, spending money, having sex, and what's the difference? You know,
Right.
I think one can make an argument that the difference is much smaller than you think it is.
it really makes me think about Midnight Gospel. And ever since I started watching it, I had a different perspective from when I started listening to Duncan. Because I watched the Midnight Gospel first, I think. And I started looking at it later on with the perspective that Clancy is kind of our soul or whatever. And he's going into these worlds in the simulation and is addicted to going into these avatars and completely ignoring. I mean, that's how the last episode ends. And honestly, that's why I think it's such a good thing that maybe there wasn't a second season because the ending was perfect, kind of like the
Mm.
whole thing explodes, the simulator explodes. And it's like, wow, it's just so crazy that we do this. And integration, man. I mean, it's it sounds very similar as well to um maybe going through a good taking off your headset feels kind of like what it feels like after you have a psychedelic trip, honestly, or maybe in the peak of a psychedelic trip. Um, so do you have any tips for integration? Because I feel like a lot of times, like Clancy goes many times back into the worlds and doesn't really let these experiences um kind
Like
of
take hold. Yeah.
pick hold. Yeah, because maybe that's what we are doing. Maybe we're Clancy.
Yeah, I mean that it's a, but you do make a good point in all seriousness. And I think that's one of the big differences between the 19 the counterculture 60s,
Oh,
70s use of psychedelics and today's use. Even the way I grew up, it's like, we still were really fixated on chasing peak experience,
right.
which was fun. There's fun aspects to that, but we're always trying to go back to, that central
Oh,
stage of chaos. And yeah, and you can go back and keep going there, and it's fine, but it's more useful for your everyday life to come back, take some time, and really understand, or not understand, but try to manifest and find some ways to take those realizations and apply them to your daily life. Because psychedelics are not a sustainable method, like say meditation is. You can't do them every day. It's not a
mm,
daily practice, It's something that you can drop into now and then to
right. You can do it every
get,
other day because of the tolerance.
yeah, I mean,
I'm just
but
kidding.
not even that, you can just drop in now and then to kind of reset, explore, but you got to come back and make it work for your everyday life. Otherwise, you'll fall into escapist paradigms, and
Right.
you don't want to do that.
Yeah, because it gives you an opportunity to um one of the things that I love in the end of the psychedelic experience is well, not in the end. A lot of the times when it tells you like when you're experiencing negative visions, or I believe it's the third bardo, fourth bardo, something like that, you clearly are not with the clear light. It tells you meditate on the vision of you in the future as you want to be. Like I think it's like the coming back into the world, like the last reforming the ego or going back into the game of ego. It tells you to meditate on an image of yourself that is something that you want for the future because you're about to come back and you're gonna have a chance to reorganize kind of like your life a little bit.
Mm.
And I love that advice because it's yeah, it kind of shows you what psychedelics are capable of.
Well, like Stan Groff said, psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers. That means they are adaptogenetic. They can adapt to what you need them to do for you. Um,
Um,
and everybody's relationship is different. If you need to, I mean, mental health has become such an
yeah.
important part of psychedelic research today. But if you need to go into kind of have a new relationship with your depression, anxiety, or your trauma, you can do that. If you need to go in to have a greater spiritual awareness, you can do that. If you need to go in to lessen some addictions or physical pain or a fuller expression of your dharma, you can do that. They're adaptogenetic. They work for
Mm.
how you need them to work for you. And
Interesting.
pretty unique. Yeah.
I, I've always heard the metaphor of kind of like a trip is kind of like being in a car, but you're in the passenger seat. No, maybe you're in the back seat. Well, obviously every psychedelic is different, but every psychedelic you're in a different part of the car. Obviously, but I I know that they talk a lot about set and setting and how important that is. And one of the reasons why it's so hard and you don't see constant psilocybin therapy being offered to everybody is because we understand that if we were to give psilocybin to someone who's having a really bad day, it's
Hmm.
probably not going to make their bad day better,
Probably not. Probably not. I mean, maybe. Yeah, I mean, I definitely
you know?
that's why, leading up to a psychedelic experience, even, if things are going well for you, um, and you've done so much careful preparation, you've been really deliberate about the journey to come, and you've been working hard at it. But then the day before the journey, you have a total meltdown. Maybe you got in just a terrible fight with your partner, your girlfriend or your boyfriend or whatever, and or something terrible happened, and then you still go ahead and do the journey the next day. It might not be the best way
Right.
to do it, and that's why that's where the whole idea of bad trips and challenging experiences
Mm,
came from, because people were doing them not really doing a temperature check of what's going underneath the hood, and they were going in anyway, and
right.
I tell anybody who's doing psychedelics, if I'm working with them as a facilitator or otherwise, like, you have the freedom to hit the eject button at any time, even 10 minutes before the journey. If it's not
Wow.
feeling right, it's okay. It's not
Wow.
the right day, and honor that.
Yeah.
Don't force yourself into it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I really like how there's drugs that cancel out bad trips.
Yeah,
I mean, kind of, you know,
a little bit.
a little bit, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah. What do you think about I was gonna ask you about microdoses, but we're kind of running a little bit short on time, and I really want to ask you a little bit about because I know you have a psychedelic cohort that I really want to be a part of. That looks so cool. Um, I'm actually gonna graduate in December, and I'm looking forward to moving to Austin.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, man, I'd love to hang out in therapy. I mean, kirtan sometime, and who
Yeah.
knows, maybe therapy too. That was an accident, but I just said it.
But my next cohort starts on April 24th, and uh, you or anyone listening is welcome to join.
Thank you. Yeah, that will be in the link for the description. But I just want to ask you real quick, your style of therapy, because you do have a lot of history dealing with psychedelic therapy, and I also know you have a very specific style that's different and original.
Mhm.
Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Well, I just want to correct the word. I'm not a therapist. Um, nor
Okay.
do I nor do I pretend to be a therapist. I mean, the word psychedelic assisted
Mm,
therapy has kind of just become a catch-all. Um, but what I do, it does not substitute the need for a therapist, like especially for severe mental health issues. If you're coming into doing psychedelic work for mental health issues, it's really important that you keep the continuity going with your traditional therapist. And then if you come to someone like me, who's kind of a facilitator, a guide, a spiritual coach,
mm,
a medicine person, that you can drop in with that person. And certainly I can help you weave through some of the complexities of what's going on with you.
mm.
But taking it back to your therapy relationship is really important. Never look at psychedelics as a way to replace therapy, especially in the mental health.
Oh,
I mean, if we're talking about
wow.
other contexts, it's different. But when we're talking about mental health, never. It's not a replacement.
Wow.
It's an additive.
Right.
It's complementary.
Right.
And yeah, so I really focus on my style. Really focuses on the spiritual nature and mystical nature of the experience, and that you're best served when you go within. You know, when you have the eye mask on and you go within and you have that conversation with yourself, with spirit, in
Mm,
a place that is very unique, you know, that you don't treat the session as 6 hours of talk therapy. You use the session to go within and to feel and to notice what's coming up in your body, and notice what's coming up with your ego, notice what's coming up with your identity, feel how the pain feels, feel how the successes feel and the triumphs, and that navigating those spaces is really sacred and special, and that it's not a cognitive experience, it's a mystical experience. So I try to really
wow.
never forget that,
Wow.
you know.
That's really cool, man. One of the things that they talk about in the book is that a lot of that you will start feeling physical symptoms in your stomach, or you will want to go to the bathroom a lot. And it says the advice is to merge with the feeling because you're having energies or changing within your body. They're flowing.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, which one? I mean, like they're all
Like,
different.
like,
Like
okay,
if you need to go to the
yeah,
bathroom, like go to
sure.
the bathroom, you know. Um, like
Hmm.
an MDMA, like, you know, you might want to pee a lot, you know, just that's just the way the
Right,
drug is. And
right.
don't resist that, you know, go to the
Hmm.
bathroom. Um, but with the others, yeah, I mean, you want to the idea is to settle into it. It's to, you know, make friends with the changes and to not fight them, especially the distractions, you know.
Mm.
It's when, you know, it's so easy to get distracted and to get away from the intentions and to let the fireworks kind of consume you, and to really get back into the intention, into being grounded, into the reason that you're there to do it in the first place. Um, that takes time to learn how to do, but it's well advised.
Do you do you like the 3 day trip advice? Not the 3 day trip, I'm sorry. Like
The
you
three
take
step
yeah,
process.
yeah, you take one day before, day and the day after.
Yeah, I mean, always well, you have to look at the entire thing always as a three-step process: preparation,
Right.
the and then integration.
Integration.
So, like the worst example, the best example of the worst thing to do would be to have a huge psychedelic experience on a Monday. I mean, a heroic dose, and then go back to your job on a Monday. That would that's terrible advice. You know, that's exactly what you don't want to do. You know, you need the day after or even a couple days after
Hmm.
to really soften your reentry, you know. Um, and that prevents, well, creates, you know, more effectiveness, more efficacy, you know.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, man. I do have to run, but
All right, Zach. Well, thank you so much, man. I'm really looking forward
pleasure.
to all of the new therapy aspects and everything that's going on with psychedelics and MDMA with MAPS. Didn't get to touch on that, but thank you for
Uh,
everything, Zach.
yeah, visit maps.org and you
Of
can,
course.
yeah, but all good.
Oh,
But
and also your book is coming out. I wanted to plug that
yeah, it'll come out a year from now.
a year from
Uh,
now. Oh,
yeah,
cool.
we're in the editing phase, so but look for
Wow.
it. Yeah,
We'll save
but
that for
thank,
the next podcast.
yeah, for sure. That'd be great.
All right. Thank you, Zach. Have a great day,
Thanks,
man.
brother. You
Appreciate you.
too.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.